I'm your host, Brandy Fleck, and this is Human Amplified. We're on a mission to revamp society by amplifying your humanity. This week on the show...
Hi, I'm Meg. When you are navigating any sort of transition, it is so important that you give yourself the time and the space that you need. I tried to control the situation that wasn't mine to control. It was much better for everybody if I would just focus on what I did have control over and what I really could have an impact on. We all bring baggage. You're supposed to show up exactly who you were created to be. The world needs you.
On the surface, this episode is all about parent-child relationships that grow and blossom into mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationships. However, that discussion is really the vehicle to get at what's underneath nurturing your important relationships through the emotional baggage that accumulates through the change of life and then surfaces in those relationships with your people. By natural design, life is full of change, and that means our relationships are also full of change because relationships are a focal point of human existence. Change can cause bliss and pain and a number of emotions in between. As humans, our ability or inability to process emotions about change in our lives causes emotional baggage, and we take that with us into our present moment. We all do it. This episode is so important because it comes at a time when we've been in constant transition for about a year, and there might be more accumulation of baggage there than you're used to. That's why Meg Smidt, a certified life and business coach who's been at it for a decade, is on the show this week. This episode with Meg is a gold mine of advice, not only based on her personal experience, but also based on her years of coaching. She really digs deep into her own story with transitioning from a successful retail career into being a mom to 5 nearly overnight and blending into a life and family she loves, but that she didn't necessarily expect to have. So as we go through Meg's wisdom, she and I span the spectrum of emotions as we crack up laughing and quietly nearly cry at times. That's because we talked about everything from recognizing baggage and nurturing our loved ones through their own, but also how you know when it's time to let go. Meg's tangible tips that she sprinkles like confetti throughout are just as wide-ranging. She gives advice on how to accept your loved ones for who they truly are, letting go of control, leading with honor in complex interactions, having fun in commonality, having consistency, setting boundaries, navigating change, and the importance of reflecting, feeling grief, and growing through what you're going through. In fact, Meg gives away so many gems that you can start applying to your life. We decided to give away a free Nurturing Yourself and Others Through Emotional Baggage tip sheet to download and take with you well after this episode is over. So make sure you go ahead and grab that from the show notes at humanamplified.com/episodes/068. You'll be really glad you did. One other thing that I just have to tell you about is I met up with Meg in her digital space where she hosted me, and we talked about how to grow through grief when life keeps changing around you. So that's a really nice extension of what we're going to talk about today. And there's even a free guide that goes along with that you can download. So make sure you go to yourcoachmeg.com and find the replay in her blog and download your free guide. So many goodies, just so many goodies. Hey guys, as always, thank you so much for listening and thank you for your support. If you haven't already subscribed to the Human Amplified podcast, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform of choice. And then leave us a rating and review. You can even go follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the places at Human Amplified, and leave us a rating and review there. We love to hear from you. We love to know how we're doing and how we've impacted your life. Just to give our listeners a little background, you were actually on the show very early on in season 1. You did a Valentine's Day special with your honey.
So fun.
And yeah, it was awesome. So I'm super excited to have you back.
Thank you.
Yeah. Would you just take a minute and introduce yourself to our listeners? For those of them who didn't hear your first episode, let them know who you are, what you do, a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. And definitely go back and listen to that episode. It's a doozy for sure. But so, hi, I'm Meg. I am 100% a confetti throwing life and business coach with your coach, Meg. And I'm 45. I have bright purple hair. I typically in my life, up until very recently, had a bunch of kids running around my house. We have 5 adult kids currently that are ages 22 to 29. So they're all big adults out in the world. I do actually have one grandbaby as well, which is super weird to be 45 and having a grandkid. But currently, my babies are actually my 2 deaf Great Danes, Luna and Solus, and they definitely keep us very busy. I live in St. Louis with my husband, Craig, and our youngest, Vicky, and the 2 dogs. And to be honest, I'm super passionate about small business and helping women live their very best lives and thrive through their businesses and careers, or really anything that they're really passionate about doing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. And let's dive a little bit more into your personal story. You mentioned, being married and having kids.
Mhm.
Can you give us details about like when you got married, when you became a mom, and then when you became a businesswoman?
Yeah, so I was a businesswoman and back in the day, and in 2003 I got together with this guy named Craig, and he completely rocked my world. So at the time I was 26, 27, ish 27 when we got together. And both of us were just getting out of our first marriages. His lasted a lot longer than mine. And we started dating and pretty much instantly and got full custody of his 5 kids, like overnight. So this was in around 2003. We were in a 1 bedroom apartment, super fun. And that's some of our happiest times, to be real honest with you. And this was in Southern California. And so we got together in 2003. At 27, I became a full time mom to 5 kids. And it was a little crazy.
Yeah.
We got married in 2004, and I adopted all the kids in 2009, but I was full-time mom that whole entire time. So for a year, I was dad's girlfriend and taking care of all the kid things. Then we got married and it totally did things in a crazy order. Literally, you could never get any judgment on my end because I've done it all, right, guys? So, like I'd mentioned, I was in luxury retail before we got the kids. When we got the kids, I had to take a little bit of a step back, to be honest. They were my priority.
Hmm.
There was a lot of abandonment issues and, just me kind of learning how to mom. I was all about me before then, and it completely changed my life becoming a mom overnight to 5 kids. And at the time, they were ages 4 to like 12.
Okay.
Okay. So then I went back into the working world in retail. I actually worked for a national bank starting in about 2000, 2005, 2006.
Mhm.
And I did that until, and we moved to Tennessee in 2007. 2010, I actually became a life coach.
Okay. 2010.
Yeah, that's when it all began. All my kids at the time were like middle school, high school-ish ages. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Oh my gosh. From the abandonment issues to the learning how to mom, can you give us some examples of what it was like gaining full custody overnight and how you dealt with some of those issues?
Hmm. Yeah. So I literally didn't even change a diaper till I was 42. So I'm very thankful that all my kids were potty trained by the time I came. I think they are too, to be honest. But so in gaining 5 kids, I also gained an ex wife.
Mhm.
I also gained, really never having any firsts. They all had a ton of firsts, right?
Mhm.
And I didn't. I think we might have even talked about that a little bit the last time I was on.
Yeah, yeah.
Which, that's hard. That's hard when they have all these memories that you aren't a part of, and those types of things. And honestly, one of the hardest parts of all of it for me was really my identity at that point in my life was wrapped into, I was in bands and stuff. So a lot of my identity was really into like the fact that I was kind of big in a really small music scene.
Hmm.
And I performed, all over the country in bands, did things like that. Craig and I actually had our own record label for a while. Stuff like that was going on. And then my retail career. I had a very good career in luxury retail. I was great at it. I loved it. I, climbed the ladder, did all the things. And then all of a sudden I'm taking care of kids 24/7 and helping them navigate this world of where did my mom go? And she had a lot of health issues going on at the time, and none of us knew what we were doing, right? We just tried to do the best we can. So getting them into therapy and getting myself into therapy and and all the things, just getting out of a horrible marriage myself, even, to be honest, and all of that. So really, I think we all kind of had some abandonment issues, and we're just doing the best we could to navigate all of it. But I think the hardest part for me within all of that was the fact that I now kind of identified as like mom, right? Even though I had no idea what I was doing. And
Hmm.
the only person I really felt like really understood my life was their bio mom. And she was the one person I could never talk to about it.
Hmm. Why couldn't you talk to her about it?
Well, understandably, she didn't like me very much.
Okay.
I mean, kids weren't allowed to say my name around her, like, just stuff you do, I think, when you're dealing with a lot of hurt that was valid.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Her life completely turned upside down. But she literally was the one person in the world that could understand what I was going through. And that was hard. We even had that conversation one day where I actually said to her,
Mhm.
I've realized you're the one person I can't talk to about it, but you're the only person that really understands. And that was hard. And I had to grieve that,
Yeah.
and it's okay. We all made it through. It's fine. But like, helping a 10-year-old understand, like, why, one day at the time, my one of my kids who was 10, he says to me, I want to go live with my mom. And I said, I get that, but why? What's going on? He said, well, that's how I can make her see me all the time. And I'm like, oh God, like, and just having to hold him and just say, I understand,
Yeah.
that stinks. Like, I'm sorry you're having to deal with this right now,
Yeah.
and just realizing that it's not about me. It's not about their dad. It's not about her. It's just about making sure the kids got what they needed.
Mhm.
And while it wasn't easy, you kind of, when you're a parent, it's like something just kicks in, or at least it did for me,
Yeah.
where it's like you just do what you have to do.
Yeah, and with everything happening as what seems like as abruptly as it did, it seems like it would have had to have kicked in for you to embrace it the way that you did, because it sounds like you really just embraced it and dove in.
Sure. Well, I think, it probably helped that my personality is whatever I do, I kind of do it to like the nth degree.
Mhm.
So, well, I never wanted kids. Like growing up, I told my mom, I remember telling my mom at like the age of 10, I'm never having kids. And she's like, you're so weird. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I just know I'm never having kids. And in my brain, it was, I'm never giving birth.
Yeah.
My brother was adopted. So I don't think I ever thought I'm never going to have kids in my life,
Mhm.
but somehow I knew I wasn't going to have babies, right? Like, I don't know where, I don't know how or why or anything. But my mom will say, like, yeah, you said that to me several times growing up. And so, when Craig came around, I remember we were dating, he actually said to me, like, you realize for someone who never wanted kids, you're like the most nurturing person on the planet. And I'm like, shut up. No, I'm not, because I never babysat. Like, I never did those things that you kind of rite of passage things that you do as a kid. I never did that. I just love people.
Mhm.
So when these little humans were like kind of literally put in my lap, and they were so craving someone who would make them the center of their world, and I did that.
Mhm.
We got along like that. Like, our story is not a typical story. Like, literally, I think my oldest is the only one that kind of held out for a minute.
Mhm.
But then once he saw that, like, I saw him, You know what I mean? And like he loved to read and he loved books and things like that. When I connected with him with that, because I loved the same,
Mhm.
everything was fine. Like, but he was like, wait a minute, who are you?
Yeah.
But once they saw I wasn't going anywhere
Mhm.
and that I actually, cared and, all these things, like literally we didn't skip a beat.
That's awesome.
I know it's not typical. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you just tell us why are relationships complex?
Well, I mean, I really feel like being human, part of being human means that we're flawed, right?
Mhm.
Literally, no one is perfect. You can never be perfect. It's a thing you just have to come to terms with. As a human, you are flawed, right? I'm flawed, everyone is flawed.
Mhm.
And honestly, it's hard to keep the main things because we're honestly also distracted all the time. And I think we purposely keep ourselves distracted because it's hard dealing with our stuff.
Right?
Like kind of the idea of like it's so much easier for me to focus on you than it is to focus on me or focus on the person who's making me mad.
Mhm.
And typically, if I do focus on the person that's making me mad, it's because I'm kind of mad that I do the same thing. But it's easier for me to just be mad about what they're doing than for me to focus on myself and like try to grow and be better.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Yep.
So I think that's a big reason of what makes us complex is number one, we're flawed, even though we don't want to be. We want to be perfect.
Mhm.
And the second part of that is we let ourselves, honestly, a lot of times get distracted by things that really don't matter in the grand scheme of life because it's easier than dealing with our stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm totally saying that from experience. I am in no way perfect or any of those things.
Sure, sure. Okay, so I feel like we've set the foundation a little bit for like why relationships are complex, some complex relationships that you've navigated.
Yeah.
So, how have you seen that complicated parental relationships impact a person's ability to relate? How would a complicated parental relationship impact a person in general?
Well, I mean, part of that could be if you were raised by a complicated parent, if you had a complicated relationship with your parent,
Mhm.
I think just naturally that can impact what you do. Number one, or kind of we all bring baggage to everything,
Mhm.
whether it's past, our parents or family relationships or romantic relationships, friendships, anything. We
Mhm.
all bring that into our present. And a lot of times we know that for ourselves, but we don't really a lot of times take that into account for the other people that we're in relationship with.
True, that's really true, yeah.
And it doesn't help. So I feel like, that's one aspect of how that can impact your ability to interact with other people or parent or whatever. But especially, I mean, speaking as a stepmom turned adoptive mom,
Mhm.
I literally became a parent and I don't know under the age of 4. And
Mhm.
at this point, I don't know over the age of 29, right?
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's my experience. I didn't have the years leading up to when I became a parent where I think you kind of figure some things out, trial and error, just by what you go through.
Mhm.
I jumped in at a point where I already had these humans, right? And someone else had done the work that led up to that.
Yeah.
That was complicated in itself because there were already patterns and behaviors that had started that I had nothing to do with.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't feel like I can speak to my husband's story, and I don't feel like I can speak to Biomom's story. I can really only speak to mine in that situation.
Yeah.
And I feel like the way that that kind of impacted, that kind of complicated aspect of me being a parent, how that interacted with my ability to parent or to relate to my kids was that I really had to intentionally stick with what's happening right now and where do we want to go?
Mhm.
Like forward moving. Like I can't impact anything that's already happened before me. And I feel like Brandy, I feel like this really works too if you're considering other relationships, right? Like the fact that we all bring this baggage to the table of like everything we do
Yeah.
and all the relationships that we have. If we just did this small thing that's very big and very hard to do, but the small thing of not keeping that record of wrongs,
Yeah.
and not always go back to all the past list of things that happened, but really take what's right in front of you and try to move forward. If we all kind of really tried to adopt that mindset with every relationship, I really feel like that's a difference maker in uncomplicating things.
Mm.
And it's not easy. I'm not even pretending that that's like, oh, okay, Meg, sure, I got you. I'm going to do that. It takes a lot of intentionality and it takes a lot of letting go.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, I've been through it
Hmm.
in any complicated relationship situations I've been in, even with my kids.
Hmm.
That's complicated, right?
Yeah.
And especially as they've grown into adults and all of that, and had a lot of questions and, things like that. I will tell you, one of my kids specifically, and I had a pretty rocky relationship. Like if he was here with me, he'd be like, oh yeah, like nothing we haven't talked through and stuff.
Hmm.
There was a time where we were really going through a rough time in our relationship. And he actually said to me, Mom, if you could just stop bringing up all the things I've done that were hurtful in the past, that would really help me. Because I know I did all those things and I'm not proud of it and I don't feel good about it. And I'm not even saying I'm never going to do them again.
Hmm.
Doesn't help when I'm trying to help us move forward. And I was like, dang. And it was a difference maker for us in our relationship, was just
Yeah.
that one thing and me being like, wow, he is so right.
Yeah. And something that you hit on there that I want to call out too is that you listened to him.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's a huge thing. I think sometimes parents find it hard to listen to their kids because they're in the role of teaching and parenting as opposed to, oh, I can actually learn from this person.
Yeah. Well, and my kids now as adults, they've like told me they appreciated the fact that I would actually like apologize to them when I did things that weren't great
Hmm.
and actually say like, will you forgive me?
Yeah.
And to actually say to them, I'm human too. I'm going to mess up,
Yeah.
but you can talk to me. And maybe that's because I didn't have a rule book of any kind for what I was doing, and I kind of just had to make it up as I went along. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the conversations we've had now that they're adults, they love that they've told me that they really appreciate the fact. And even as an adult, I still do that with
Hmm.
them.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really awesome. I also love how you brought up the topic of letting go as a way of not keeping score and moving forward in relationships. I definitely want to hit on that later. We're going to talk about some transitions, but before we get into that, I want to say I heard you say that you approached nurturing your relationship with your kids by meeting them where they were at,
Mm.
connecting with them, seeing them, listening to them. Are there any other things that you would say you did to nurture each of those relationships?
Sure. I mean, when there's 5, it's not easy. And I actually, honestly, right along with that, I love the fact that we had other adults in our kids' lives. Like my husband's sister was awesome, or like her gift to our kids every year for like their birthday or whatever was actually a weekend with them of just them,
Oh, that's awesome.
like without their siblings and stuff. Because when you have 5 kids, it's hard
Mhm.
to have that much time to do enough one-on-one anything,
Mhm.
so not only was it helpful for us to intentionally carve out time one-on-one as often as we could, but also that we had other adults in our life that made that a priority to kind of support us with that, which
Yeah.
our kids loved so much. And like they could pick what they did, and like it, because when you have 5, like it's a fight, no one will ever agree on anything. I remember when when Craig first, was like, we talked marriage and stuff, and I remember I told him, the only way I will marry you is if all the kids agree like it's okay or whatever. And he's like, Meg, they won't even agree on a cereal, let alone let alone having you like as my wife or whatever. But anyway, they did, that's fine. Spoiler alert. But I mean, I think that is a lot of it, like actually intentionally inking in time
Mhm.
individually. And it doesn't have to mean they get like a whole weekend or these like huge grand gestures, but even just knowing them well enough to know what they're into or what they're interested in or whatever, and like talking to them about it.
Mhm.
Or hey, I've like these days it could even be like, and I do this, like I find a song I think one of them will like and sending it to them, just saying like, hey, have you heard this? I think you'd like it.
Yeah.
Just letting them know I see them even was huge. Like see them for who they are, not who I want them to be, or any of those things, no matter what age they were or what kind of crazy they were into. Cause I mean, I can't talk. I was into some weird stuff when I was younger too. But I think that's a thing. Also, something I did with most of the kids is I would, once they got to be around middle school, where you kind of just naturally shut down a little bit
Mm-hmm.
or not really know how to relate. With many of them, I ended up getting like a spiral notebook that we would pass back and forth to each other. That the only rule with it is that we wouldn't talk about anything that was in the notebook out loud. Like it only happened in the notebook.
Interesting.
And like I would make a plan with each one that I did this with, like where are we going to leave it for each other?
Mm-hmm.
Like so only we knew about it and knew where it was. So no one else could find it or whatever. And it was a lot of like leaving it under my pillow and I would leave it under their pillow or whatever. But the whole thing is like sometimes it's easier to write something down than to say it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also like get it out, right? Especially when you're like starting that age group where it starts getting rough. You know, you're dealing with some weird stuff at that time. And I loved it because it was a way I could connect with them in a completely different way that no one else knew about.
Mm-hmm.
And like they didn't know I was doing that with all of them.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It was a very much a one-on-one kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, so, you deal with all these things that happen in relationships as kids grow up and then they become adults and they get married and they bring other wonderful people into our lives.
Yeah.
So you have one daughter-in-law, that's correct?
I do, Chelsea, yes.
Okay. So how did you approach nurturing that relationship with her? Was it in the same type of way? I mean, obviously not from like, the younger kid perspective, but
Yeah.
what did you do there?
Honestly, it kind of similar. I think so. When she and my son Steven started dating, they were both pretty young in high school. We got to know her very quickly and pretty deeply and her family. And her family's wonderful, amazing people. But I think all of us will admit and have admitted even to each other that we are all night and day. Like my family is like night and day from her family and vice versa. Like we do a lot of things really differently, but we all love each other so much and appreciate each other and all those things. But the reason why I say that is because she grew up in a completely different environment and everything than our family looked like in like 1,000 ways. And it's not even, we don't need to go into it,
Mhm.
but it's not like, two people growing up in the exact same environment and all the things. And one of the big differences was the fact that our family is very direct.
Okay.
We don't beat around the bush. If there's an issue, we deal with it. We deal with it very openly and that kind of thing. And her family, not so much, not that one is better than the other. I'm not putting any sort of judgment on that.
Mhm.
But those are big differences. If you're raised in a certain environment and then you get plopped down into something the exact opposite, you kind of don't know what to do with that, right?
Right.
And I'm very hands on with my kids. I'm very like, I love knowing all the things. I mean, honestly, when I was 27, people thought I was their older sister, not their mom,
Yeah.
because I mean, I looked young and I mean, all the things. So
Yeah.
I think we've always kind of had, I mean, definitely a parent kid relationship, but at the same time, my pulse is definitely on their lives. And like, I like the same music. I like, all these kind of same things. I'm fun. I'm whatever. So like when Chelsea came around, I instantly was like, I love her, and but she was very quiet. And as you can tell, I'm not. And she's very much an introvert.
Mhm.
I'm definitely an extrovert. Like we're opposites in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
But I never tried to make her be someone she wasn't or like expect her to be or whatever. I let her really be who she is. And I think that's something I've done really with all my kids as much as I possibly can. So I do feel like I approached nurturing our relationship really in the same, very similar ways. I also knew a lot of the people she was friends with and that my son were friends with. And like, I mean, I knew her life
Yeah.
pretty well. Yeah.
That's awesome. I also would love to like be involved and know everything and like about, what all the kids are doing, but it's a little different because like you mentioned when,
Sure.
when things are set in motion before you got there, people are used to doing things a certain way. It's an adjustment for everyone, and
It is.
so we have that going on in our family.
And I think, kind of along with what you're saying, Brandy, I will tell you in the beginning, I did everything wrong. Everything. Everything wrong with my relationship with our kids' biological mom. I went through things where like, I'm gonna keep us organized. I'm gonna have her deal with a binder. And like I would give her copies of all the kids' assignments and whatever. And why? Like I wanted her to have an involvement with our kids
Mhm.
that she didn't necessarily want. I was trying to make her be someone in our kids' lives because it's what I think I would have wanted, but I wasn't taking anything into account of what she actually did want, or you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I tried to control the situation that wasn't mine to control because like we were talking about earlier, I felt like I didn't want to look at me and what I could possibly be growing or working on or changing or whatever. So like once I let that go and realize I am who I am in their lives and she is who she is, and that's exactly what needs to happen, and I need to stop forcing anything of her right where she's at and help the kids do the same thing and be Meg. Just be Meg to my kids, whatever that was going to look like.
Yeah.
And the more I focused on that and not what I couldn't do or couldn't be, like there was a time I wasn't allowed to cut my daughter's bangs because weird rules like that happen when you're a step parent, right? There's
Yeah.
just weird rules happen. And it was like, okay, so her bangs are down to her nose, but it's fine. So instead of fixating on that, which I did.
Mhm.
So when I realized what I was doing was crazy, it was, hey, let's go get some cute headbands.
Oh, yeah.
Let's learn how to braid, or let's learn how to do this. So instead of fixating on the stuff that just sucked or that I had no control over or couldn't do, I realized it was much better for everybody if I would just focus on what I did have control over and what I really could have an impact on. And I knew that I could 1,000% control what my relationship was with all these people.
Mhm.
I couldn't control what I got back. None of us can.
Right.
But I wanted to feel good about what I was doing and how I was leading myself. And that I can control. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope that's helpful with what you're saying.
Oh, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You mentioned you're really hands-on and that you confront things directly. I want to preface this with you recently wrote an article with Chelsea that
Yes.
we're going to link to that article in the show notes, guys. It's all about their relationship and it's really good. In that article, she mentioned that early on in her young relationship with your son that you approached her with concerns. Can you talk about what those concerns were and how she responded and how you guys sort of got through that?
Sure. I mean, to be so honest with you, Brandy, I don't remember
Okay.
what the concerns were. I do believe her that that's what happened because I can imagine myself being like, I don't know, you guys, I can imagine that, right?
Yeah.
But to be honest, I don't remember, but probably some of it had to do with the fact, like it does in any new relationship where kind of everybody else doesn't exist and you're just like, tunnel vision, with this person that, and I think it might have been, I wish she was here to like give her 2 cents because I know she remembers everything. Okay. I'm guessing it had something to do with that. And that, I was just saying like, you guys, you could like still hang out with your friends and, or something like that. I don't
Mhm.
remember. Anyway, at the time, I want to say she was maybe like 16-ish and he was maybe like junior, senior in high school. And What had happened was whatever I said, I obviously didn't think a whole lot of it if I even don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
But what happened was her response to whatever that was she sent me a very detailed Facebook message that was basically reaming me as a parent, basically ripped me upside and down about everything I'm doing wrong as a parent and how it's hurting my son and all of these things and how I needed to get my act together, kind of thing, like in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
And I read it and I was like, oh, bless her. I'm like, number one, she's got balls. And I really like admire, I didn't know she had it in her. She was very quiet.
Yeah. You mentioned.
Oh, she was very quiet. Like she
Yeah.
wouldn't even say a word like around us or anything. So I was like, look at that. I was kind of impressed, but then I was like, okay, I can't even get mad at this. Cause number one, this took a lot for her to send this, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, the only information she is going off of on anything is my teenage son being frustrated on life.
Mm-hmm.
That's her perspective that she's getting. She's not a parent. She's never been a parent. And she has her own kind of tunnel vision worldview at this point in her life anyway. So literally my response to her was, I love you. I basically just, my husband was pissed, and I mean, part of me was like, but I just responded and said, I love you. I understand that you're aware that you only have part of this story, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So just know that it's not my place to tell you what to do or tell my son what to do or any of those things. But I do feel like in time, you're going to understand a bigger picture of this situation than what you're currently seeing. And I just want you to know I love you and I appreciate you telling me that. And I can't wait to see you and give you a hug. Basically was my response.
Wow.
And it was a minute before we saw each other again. And when we did, though, I just gave her a hug and we never mentioned it until years later.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, remember that message? She's like, oh my God, please never bring that up. So now it's kind of like a funny thing. But at the time, she really felt very passionate about that because all that she knew was whatever she had grown up with.
Yeah.
And, whatever Stephen had told her was all she knew. She had no idea anything outside of that. And she would have no way of knowing that. It was okay.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Well, I love that though. I love that you reacted that way. And I just think it's a great example for how people could react anytime somebody sort of lashes out and they have a limited perspective, or people do that, they get upset or they respond emotionally, and love is the way to meet them.
Yeah. Well, and it's not like I'm this like angel or anything. I've done dumb things,
Sure.
I've done stupid things or whatever. But like when the situations like that happen, of course, I have the same knee gut reaction everyone else does, right? Of like, what the heck just happened? But then it's like, well, wait a minute. I think the problem is a lot of us just react.
Yeah.
And what I really encourage a lot of my clients, me, everything is like, no one needs a response right away. You are going to you're going to emotionally want to react. But I fully believe in like leading with honor. Okay. So like if I'm in a tough situation, a relationship or anything, and in the moment, I really just want to scream my head off or whatever, right? Because I'm a very emotional person. That's like a superpower I have, right? But what I found is what's more helpful for me to do is to stop. And if I need to take myself out of the situation, take myself out of it. But if I don't even need to, if it's just like, the question I ask myself in my head is, how can I honor this person right now? Or how can I even honor me?
Yeah.
Right now, depending on the situation, right? And what I care about for me and what I care about for all of my clients and for all of your listeners and all the things is that you feel good about how you respond.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, when you do an emotional knee-jerk reaction, you do not feel good about it later. You beat yourself up, you replay it over and over in your head until it becomes even something it never even started. All of those things, that's what we do. So my goal for myself and for everyone else that I have any sort of influence over is to let's stop, literally stop. And if that means you need to leave the room, leave the room. If you don't need to, if your back's kind of turned a little and you can like take a minute, it's saying to yourself, How can I show honor right now in this moment? And sometimes that means saying something that's really hard for that other person to hear. Sometimes honor means you have a really difficult conversation. But
Yeah.
sometimes honor just means you give them a hug. Sometimes honor means, you know what, I need a minute. Or sometimes honor means it isn't okay for you to talk to me that way.
Yeah.
Okay. It can mean different things in different situations, but if all of us are committed to leading with honor, we are always going to feel good when that conversation is over, no matter what happens.
Mhm.
Okay.
Even if it's difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a game changer, really, to just look through everything with that lens. Okay. My relationships with my kids have been crazy over the, I mean, most of us have been through the therapy and all the things, but there's still just all the stuff you go through, right?
Mhm.
And we've gone through seasons that were tough. We've also gone through some amazing seasons. But remembering that that's what they are, they're seasons. And each one of my kids went through them in different ages and different stages. Like our younger kids kind of went through completely different kind of things than our older kids did because of the ages that they were at when certain things happened and stuff.
Mhm.
So like they dealt with things in completely different ways than some of our older kids, some good, some bad, whatever. But every situation was different. So I don't compare them to each other ever with anything. That's not fair, you know, just like I don't want them to compare me with anyone else. That's not fair either.
Yeah.
But the more that we can, like we talked about, not keep that record of wrongs and really just looking at what's in front of me right now with this person or this situation, and what do I do from here?
Mhm. Let's back up into your relationship with Chelsea for just a minute. How has that relationship evolved
Sure.
over the years from that early young relationship
Awkward.
to
Yeah.
now?
Well, it's been interesting. Two of my kids are in the military, and her husband is one of them. And he's on his second deployment right now, second year-long deployment in the time that they've been together. The first time they were engaged, and then he deployed for a year. And I very intentionally stayed very close to her during that time. She spent a lot of time at my house. During that time, we spent a lot of time together. It was really important to me to encourage her to explore like her passions, her dreams. She's a wonderful artist. And I really wanted to encourage her with that. She's very good. We did a lot of things together, would hang out together. She'd just come over, just keeping up with her, just like I do other people in my life.
Yeah.
And I'd say even more so and more intentionally through the deployment. When he came back, they got re-engaged, and then we were planning wedding, all the things. But absolutely, I take a back seat and like, hey, you're mom and you got this, but whatever you need, let me know. Whatever. Like, I don't need to be involved, whatever. And then there was like bio mom too, right? And so same thing with my son. It was like, listen, if however you want her involved, don't worry about me. I'm safe. If you want to do a dance with her, if you want to any like whatever, like I don't care, this is your party, this is your show, I don't need anything, I know my relationship with you, and like
Mhm.
I don't need any of the pomp and circumstance, we're good. And I think that helped,
Mhm.
that was able to just like without them even asking, to just say like don't worry about me, do what you need to do for you guys. And the same thing, like, so once they were married and then you start figuring out what are we doing for holidays and what are we da, la, la, la. My husband and I always are like, don't worry about us, whatever. We're here if you want to hang out with us. If you don't, it's fine. Don't worry about us. And now there's a grandbaby, and same thing when Jude was born and everything. So my relationship with Chelsea during all that time has just been like, we do a lot of like Marco Polo. We did that for a while where we would send video messages back and forth because we've moved a lot. There's been a lot of like us moving away, which is abandonment in some way, right? And like we've had a lot of that. So I've had to be really intentional about staying in touch and checking in and seeing how they're doing and that kind of thing. Like if I see things I know that she would like or whatever, I'll send them to her and she does the same with me. She comes to some of my workshops and things. Like we like a lot of the same kind of stuff. We're into a lot of the same things. We both love art. We both love a lot of really creative things. So that helps. We have a lot in common. that way, but we're also both very different people. So I think that's what helps, is that I'm not trying to make her be someone she isn't, and she doesn't do the same with me either. Like, oh my gosh, Brandy, when they were planning the wedding, I asked her, I'm like, do you want me to like not have purple hair, or like, do you want to check my dress? Like, before? And she's like, oh my God, you can do whatever you want. Please show up as you. And I'm like, okay, good. But I'm also like, like, I get it if she didn't want that, like, that's okay. I mean, I don't know if I might get a wig and not like change my hair, but like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, I didn't know if she would want to look back on her pictures and like, so I mean, things like that, just being thoughtful and trying to make sure that I see her and that it's okay if she needs me to do anything different, even though every time she's like, no, you're you and that's fine, kind of thing. So,
Yeah. It seems really consistent when you say, don't worry about us, whatever you need, we'll go with the flow. Is you not trying to control something that you probably, don't have control over anyway? It's really consistent with what you said earlier. Do you find that you still get sufficient time and sufficient involvement, even though you're saying, don't worry about us?
yeah, because they like being around us. I mean, I don't know. Does that sound bad? I mean, we have
No.
a really good time. Like, she used to always joke about when they were a little bit younger, so she would always joke about like whenever she would leave hanging out with us, her face would hurt from like laughing and smiling so much, which to me is like the biggest compliment ever. But so I think because like we actually do have a lot in common and enjoy a lot of the same things,
Mhm.
that I don't think I mean, of course, we've chosen to live away from a lot of our family. So part of it's our own doing, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I would say, like, for the most part, like, she messaged me a little bit ago and said, like, hey, what does the last week of the year look like for you? Because I'm thinking about bringing up Jude the last week of the year. I'm like, come on up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we just talk about it. A new thing happened this past fall. Their biological mom actually moved from California to their area after 18 years
Wow.
or something. So that's new, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be honest, at first it was like, but then it's like, well, wait, I just really hope this is great.
All right. You've got some physical boundaries from important relationships, but in close relationships, whether you're physically together or apart, what about boundaries when it comes to being direct and communicating? Where are the boundaries and how do you set those?
Honestly, it's communicating and setting expectations and also asking for expectations. So not only setting them on my end, but also asking from their end if they don't feel comfortable. I'm not just saying Chelsea, but like anybody really, if they don't feel comfortable, but actually being a little bit proactive and like actually ask. For example, now we're all in this, weird COVID time, right? Jude just had his first birthday. And so she had brought up to me, so my mom wants to do this big party. We want it for Jude. We want to do it early because Stephen was deploying. So they wanted to do it early while he was still here because he was going to be gone for his actual first birthday. So this is what we're planning. Do you want to be a part of that? And I basically said, listen, I'm not doing a big party.
Mhm.
Love y'all. Maybe I'm interested in being on it like virtually, but I just don't feel safe doing that right now. I think it's great that you guys want to do it and do whatever you want, but like, even if I was there, I don't think I would be a part of that. So instead, we figured out us being a part of the birthday. That's really what we do. Let's talk about it. Because I know they don't like it that we're not there for all the holidays and whatever, but like we're kind of used to not having everyone around for holidays now. And we've kind of made our own traditions, just like we did when our kids were younger. And Biomom got them every other year for holidays, like you do. And it's like we kind of got good at coming up with new traditions and different things.
Something else that has been going in and out of this conversation is big transitions too, because you've had a lot of those, while the kids were growing up, you moved a lot, new relationships, evolving relationships. So What is your advice in general for navigating big transitions?
Sure. So transition is just a big word for like change. So we all go through them all the time and probably don't even realize it unless it's like a really hard one. For example, the whole year of 2020 has been like transition after transition, right? Even daily transitioning depending on what's happening in the world. And it's kind of, it doesn't happen all the time where the whole planet goes through transitions at the same time, but that is something we've all kind of dealt with this year, whether we wanted to or not. I think that's important to note too, that not always are transitions things that we do on purpose. And I think that's also makes it kind of harder if it isn't our choice to do the transition. Like it's a choice when you choose to leave one job for another job. That doesn't mean it's easy. Change is hard. Some people even say, I love change. I welcome change. Great. I do too sometimes, but that doesn't mean it's easy. I will say a lot of things we've been through are messy. Being in a big family is messy. Being in a family where I blended, no one else did. I did. I blended into our family. Yeah, that's messy. Anytime those kind of things it's messy. But we are very direct and really deal with things head on. And I want to say, while other people think that's crazy, it has been helpful, definitely with dealing with a lot of those transitions, that we don't just stuff things down or
Yeah.
ignore or put it off. Like we really do, whether our kids ever liked it or not, we really did. We're like, no, we're going to talk about this. We're going to deal with it. And I think that is helpful. But I will also tell you, I'm a very bold person. I go very deep, and that can be good and that can be hard. So like, while on one end, me being a very deep and like emotional and whatever kind of person, when I'm happy, like I can make the whole world happy around me, right? But if I'm down, blah, it's terrifying. So a lot of the transitions that I've gone through, I've gone to a very deep and dark place. And while at the time I hated it and it wasn't fun, but it was absolutely so necessary and I would do it again. And I think that's a big part of it. When you are navigating any sort of transitions, whether they're big or little or any of these things, it is so important that you give yourself the time and the space that you need to reflect, to grieve, to grow through what it is that you're going through. I never wanted to while I was dealing with it. And sometimes I put it off as long as I could because it was so uncomfortable, right? But then once I finally just said, all right, this isn't working, and actually let myself sit and feel and be so sad and grieve and all of that, I started to go through it and grow and get to that other side of it.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's super uncomfortable. You're not going to want to do this at all, but it is so necessary, really, in order to learn what is there for you in that moment and not miss it, because that's the lesson, right? And that's where we grow. You can learn so much during those times, but so many of us try to avoid it because it's super uncomfortable and it's not fun and it's hard to feel all the feelings that come up in the middle of it.
Yeah. Deep, dark places is not something that I associate with you. Can you give us an example of what a deep, dark place is?
Absolutely. So for me, right off the top of my head, I think of when we moved to Arizona. So we moved from Tennessee to St. Louis in 2015. It was the first time we ever lived in a big city, even though St. Louis is like the smallest big city ever. But we weren't in the suburbs anymore. We were like in a city. There's like other cultures and flavor and whatever, and loved it. I literally did not know a soul when we moved here. And we ended up living here a year and then relocated to Arizona for my husband took a job. Okay. And I'm like, I've moved my whole life. What's another move? It's fine. I could live anywhere. I'm fine. So we moved to Arizona and literally I hated it. Now, looking back, I'm very thankful for some of the relationships I've made. I'm thankful for the season that we had there. It did me a lot of good. But being in that season was one of the hardest things I've gone through in my life. Where we physically lived there was like the outskirts of the outskirts. And so I had gone from being able to walk half a block and see my friends and be in all these creative stores and places and literally 7 minutes to anything I'd want to do. And, all that in St. Louis to literally living with like cactuses around me and like nothing. Right.
Yeah.
Plus, I was back in the suburbs where everybody has 2.5 kids and no one has time for anything. And I'm not in that season anymore. That would have worked if I was in that world, but I was living in a season where I could do anything, anytime that I wanted to, but no one else could. So I was really struggling to connect and find my people. And at the same time, my family's no longer a car ride away, they're a plane ride away, which is not easy to do. I was coaching and my clients were all over the phone and all over the country. So it's a different kind of connection, which I was doing when I lived in St. Louis too, but it was just different since I was so isolated in so many ways. I could not find a creative business community. I couldn't find anything that I had found that I really loved in St. Louis. And at the same time, I was dealing with some health things. I had found a lump in my breast. Lots of things were going on, with my body. I was also having some challenges with some of my kids that were dealing with a lot of big early 20s kind of things, crises that you deal with, and trying to navigate that really well and trying to build a business that I had started as my kids were in school, but now I'm going to give it full time. Right. And I did. And as soon as I gave it full time and launched Your Coach Meg in 2017, it exploded. So I had more work than I knew what to do with, but I was dying inside.
Yeah.
So I poured everything into my work, honestly. And every other moment I was silent and still and reflecting and being super uncomfortable and did whatever I could to take care of me until finally my husband was like, we're going to get you back to St. Louis. And I'm like, thank you.
Oh.
And we got me back and I'm happy as can be. I mean, and it's been challenging being in St. Louis. I mean, everywhere you are, there's challenges. And this year alone, I've gone through so much transition just along with everybody else. All my businesses that I coach have been going through transition. All my personal life coaching clients have been going through transition. But I don't ignore it anymore. I sit into it. And I deal with it and I cry and I grieve and I journal and I just do everything I know to do that helps me get through it and get to the other side.
Yeah. Everything you said is super important, but the topic of grief with transition is something that I want our listeners to take away from this too.
It's because something dies, right?
Yeah. Even if you choose the transition, sometimes you still grieve what you chose not to have anymore
Well, and like a way that I kind of look at that is that, especially when you think of relationships, right? When you think of change or it's time to move on or, and I'm not even talking romantic relationships. This can even be like with friendships, right? Those go through transitions too, whether we expect it or like it or not. And a way that I kind of look at that I think is helpful is thinking of, when you are hoping that a friendship or relationship is going to be forever, but then, something happens and it dissolves or whatever. It's especially hard for women, okay? Because we go through relationships differently than men. Not that one is better than the other, but women, and I'm totally generalizing. All right. Nobody send me hate mail. I'm totally generalizing here. But typically, women tend to do relationships, mostly friendships, very much deeper than men. To the point of when those friendships go south, when they end, it feels like a divorce.
Yeah.
It literally feels like a divorce to us. Most men are like, I don't need friends. Whatever. It's fine. Most, not all. But women, it's like, oh, you're killing me. And so really the way I like to view that is I think of like plants or like flowers, to be honest. Like there's perennials and annuals, right? So all flowering types of plants, follows, the same kind of basic steps in their cycle. And annuals complete their cycle in one growing season, whereas perennials live on for like 3 years or longer. Where I typically notice where struggles come in and when it's most hurtful is when we think that someone like a friend is a perennial, but they're really an annual.
Yeah.
Like you put them in this box where they're going to be there year after year after year. They're your forever person, right? But really, they might end up being an annual. And then that happens and you're like, what do I do now? I just invested everything. And now I have to start over. I have to get a new person or whatever. And we literally grieve it like a divorce, and you have to, but it's okay. Because what I know is we're always brought who we need.
Okay.
We are always brought who we need in our life. They might look differently than what we expect.
Mm-hmm.
And we might not be treating them or putting them in a place where they really belong. But I do believe we really are brought exactly who we need in our lives. It's just up to us to notice and actually put them in that place and know when it's time for them to get out of that place.
That's something. How do you know?
Oh.
How do you know when it's time to keep leaning in and working towards something and not let it go versus, okay, it's just time. It's an annual, it's not a perennial, it's time.
Some of that has to do with how well you know yourself. So if you know yourself, who you are really deeply, like at your core, like things like your core values and really kind of the relationships and situations that you tend to thrive in. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What you'll notice is typically when either a job or a relationship or whatever is starting to really tank, right? And like things are not gelling. Typically, that's because something in you, core value wise or whatever, is being hit in a negative way. So the more that you can articulate who you are at your core and what you value at your core, it's going to make more sense to you why this isn't vibing, right? Whether that's a job, whether it's a relationship of any kind. Okay. And that's where you have to take a look at that and think like, okay, so am I willing at this point in my life to work on this or adjust this? And all that I can control is my portion of it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't control what they do. So even if I'm willing and able and all the things to try to make this work on my end, but they're not or can't, like maybe they're not capable, then you have to know, you got to know when to fold them, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, really, because that's never going to get to be where you want it to, unless they are willing to do the work, to communicate, to XYZ, to have this work better. But if your inner friend circle, if it consists of mostly people that take and you're not getting anything out of that, it's probably time to, number one, reflect on that and think, am I a part of this?
Mm-hmm.
Am I constantly giving and not asking? Am I not giving them an opportunity for this to be a two-way street? It could be. I know I've done that in my life. Okay. Or it's, you know what, I'm always have that door open, but they keep taking. Then it's okay. I need to put them into a different circle of my friends. They don't belong in this safe inner circle for me. And we're not meant to have a lot of people in that circle. We're just not. We don't need to.
Yeah.
You can, but that doesn't work for everybody. It doesn't work for me. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really hard to spend the quality time you would need to nurture a relationship if you're nurturing like so many.
Right. Especially if you have kids and all these other things pulling at you. We're just not meant to have that. But I think too, a lot of times what happens is we might move into a different season of life, or a friend might. And that naturally causes us to kind of vibe in a different way just because of life circumstances.
Yeah.
Maybe someone has a kid, goes through a divorce, moves. I mean, so many things happen that are kind of out of our control a lot of times. So a lot of it's not like something you did or, sometimes it just happens, and that's okay. I think we all too have some of those people in our lives that no matter where we move, no matter how we transition, they are still there. And that's great.
Yeah.
But so that's where I think we get hung up a lot. So I'm kind of weird for my season and age group, right? So when I had 5 kids, I was freaking 27. None of my friends knew what to do with me. And I don't blame them. I didn't know what to do with me. At the time, the majority of my friends had no kids and were living the life.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden I get 5 kids and can we come over? They didn't know what to do with us. I couldn't blame them.
Right.
I didn't know what to do with all of us either. And then my friends that were parents that had kids, they kind of didn't know what to do with me either, because I was like their weird friend or whatever. Because I mean, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, So I really didn't fit in with anybody. And now, like when Vicky and I go places together, people assume we're like college roommates or something. I mean, it's kind of weird, but it's kind of cool too.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, all that to say, like, I really think like sometimes things happen with relationships that it's like no hard feelings, but you still need to grieve it because it's not what you expected.
Right. Yeah. And you can't anticipate every single thing that's going to happen, I guess.
You just can't.
Okay. Well, that is all of my questions for you. But did you have anything you wanted to say that I did not ask you about?
The only other thing that I really want to mention, that kind of goes along with that, especially speaking to this idea of knowing who you are, like really at your core, is just so helpful, because when you do that, when you take that time to really know and embrace even all the things about you that drive you crazy about yourself, right? And just like realize that's me, and like you own that and embrace it, you're able to really show up at that point into the world as your best in every aspect of your life. And when you do that, you really can thrive through every single aspect of your life. And so everyone and everything and every place gets the very best of you. They get the very best of who you were actually created to be and impact the world as. And everything is connected that way. Everything that you do, whether it's personally, professionally, you name it. So if you're struggling personally, if you're struggling professionally, it does, both areas, the place to begin is inside. And really getting to know who you are and getting so crystal clear on that, even if you don't like what some of the things are, and just owning that and realizing there's a reason. And you're supposed to show up exactly who you were created to be. The world needs you that way because no one else can do it. And then you really start appreciating that in other people as well.
Yeah. Oh, amen to that. That was beautifully said.
Oh, thanks.
Gosh, I've just appreciated everything you've offered up today in terms of your experience and your wisdom. And where can guests find you if they want more of this awesomeness?
Sure. You can pretty much find me anywhere and all the places at Your Coach Meg. So Your Coach Meg all over social media, yourcoachmeg.com is my website. I want to meet you. I want to get to know you. Please reach out and let me know that you heard me on Human Amplified. I would love to talk to you and hear your story.
Awesome. Meg, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yes, darling.
Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and learn more at humanamplified.com.